Welcome back, boxing fans. So, this year has been pretty spectacular so far, just with the added money and added influence of Saudi Arabia, specifically Turkey Al Sheikh. Sorry if I butchered his name, but I will do my best. The money and the influence and the new ideas and the new energy he's brought to boxing globally has been fantastic. We've got quite a few big events. Obviously, here's a guy that's working with every promoter to put on big events around the world. So a lot of the fears people had about events being taken out of the US market and the UK market and specifically moved to Saudi Arabia have been dispelled. So there's not a lot of reason to be anti or somehow against or somehow villainize this particular individual. At least, excuse me, not at this point. Moving into the future, who can say what will happen then? But right now, we've had great investment in boxing. We also have had great promotions. Some of those videos that were made for the Saudi events were fucking incredible. Incredible. I mean, something we've never seen in boxing before. We've seen in Super Bowls and events like that, World Cups, but we've never seen in boxing these kind of promotional videos to really sort of get people excited about these events. And they were excellent. Great ideas. The whole zombie apocalypse one, the cowboy one, obviously the other one that was happening again, sort of like Tyson's Punch Out. You know, this stuff has been great. It's really been groundbreaking as far as boxing is concerned. And obviously, we've seen some new ideas as well, which obviously grabbed attention. We had the 5-on-5 card, which was being discussed, possibly Eddie Hearn's Matchroom versus Frank Warren's. Sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head now what his is, Queensberry. And, you know, people thought for the UK crowd, this was great news because the conflicting animosity between these promotional companies, stopping big fights from happening historically. I mean, isn't this great? Groundbreaking. And of course, this was put on the undercard of Beterbiev Bivol. Unfortunately, that fight fell through. But with an undercard like this, it's easy to continue to move forward because the undercard itself is selling the whole event, right? And this even led to a 5-on-5 that's now being organized for London. And then Anthony Joshua card, which obviously is one reason why people were really pushing for Tyson Fury to beat Alexander Usyk, because they wanted, of course, to have that AJ Fury headline fight in Wembley, which would have really been sort of the perfect way to sell such a huge event in the UK to the UK crowd, especially on pay-per-view. So now we've heard rumors recently about a similar sort of situation in the States. Obviously, me and other people, YouTubers, we grabbed that idea, the 5-on-5 promotional thing, and then we've made videos discussing possibly ESPN versus PBC, right? How great would that be for American boxing to get these two promotional companies who haven't been able to work together as much as you and I would have liked, right? To give us some of the fights that we've really been looking forward to. Now, to have this sort of influence from the outside actually bring these two people together to make a 5-on-5 tournament in the US. And he was talking about doing it in a huge, like sort of football stadium, like event, maybe AT&T, you know, a big sort of venue where you could sell 60 to 70,000 people to a boxing event in the United States. That would be great. Obviously, with a great commercial behind it as well, you could really see this grabbing a lot of attention in the US market. And that's what we need. Boxing is global, but you still need strong boxing areas to do well. The States, the UK, and others. Obviously, other areas of growth are great for the sport, but you don't want to lose some strong development, already developed areas just because you have new ones developing. You'd like to keep them all, right? And sort of have this trickle down sort of effect. But what we've heard recently is not quite the same as we were led to believe that maybe we could see. We've heard about this, the possible 5-on-5 US versus Mexico. And if I'm going to be honest with you, I would have preferred a promotional company versus promotional company situation. Obviously, there's always been a lot of animosity between Showtime and HBO, which is now basically Top Rank. and PBC. The same people are pushing the same narratives. It's just obviously the names have changed, but the politics is still the same. So I thought that would have been more interesting and obviously really grab people at the grassroots level a lot more. The problem with this, unfortunately, with the US market, I think this potentially could generate even more racial animosity between, specific racial groups that consistently are going back and forth with American boxing, whether it's Black Americans and Latino Americans, Mexican Americans specifically. There's a real disdain for one another, basically from communities within the states, competitiveness within sports. And obviously, unfortunately, we see a lot of this on YouTube, which is not really a good look, especially if you want to grow a sport. You want competitiveness, you want storylines, but you don't want negative racial storylines to be the main thing that continues to propel a sport, right? And you see racial narratives in every sport, but not as much as you see it being pushed in boxing, unfortunately. But this is what they're being talked about. And when you look at this on the outside looking in, it looks great. Of course, we're hearing rumors that Canelo is not interested in fighting Bud Crawford and other such scenarios. But with an event of this magnitude, with the money potentially that could be made and paid to these fighters, it may only be a matter of time before we get all of these 10 fighters' names signed to contracts and this fight card is confirmed. At this point, it's not confirmed, but the fact that this image has blatantly been put out there, this is what we notice a lot from Saudi Arabia. When they say something, when they have a plan, inevitably that plan happens. There may be some fundamental changes within it, but overall, this plan will move forward. So I feel pretty confident that this 5-on-5 tournament in the US is going to happen. Obviously, you need a huge headline event to really sort of get the most out of it, right? And so we will see exactly how that plays out. Let's jump forward and look at these fights individually. So this guy, apparently, according to Tank Davis and some people, is bad for boxing. Why? Because he's new to the sport, right? It's ironic because a lot of people who are giving Al Haymon a complete pass when he created the PBC now are starting to point fingers at him. But yet he's not a promoter. He's not a manager. He has no connection at all financially with the fighters, controlling them or the events, outside of the fact that he's funding it, right? And his face inevitably becomes the face of it. But there's promoters, many promoters on one card working together. Obviously, all these boxers are managed by different people, right? None of whom are from Saudi Arabia. So there's not nearly the same conflict of interest we saw with Al Haymon as an example. But people went out of their own to defend Al Haymon and give him a pass. Why? Well, because they were hoping that he would represent their people, their culture. And with a lot of these guys, that's always what it's about, as opposed to the sport, right? They don't care so much about the sport. They care about their own self-serving interest. Whereas this is all about the sport. This does not self-serve me, right? Because literally he's paying money to every single promotional company, all kinds of boxers from all ethnicities and all nationalities, right? There's literally no need or no sort of nothing to actually attack him for. Tank Davis attacking him is because potentially Tank Davis has been made to look bad because he's not interested in making big fights. We knew that already, but Turki Al-Sheikh, by offering him a huge fight with Devin Haney, career legacy type of money and just legacy fight, he walked away from that, showed no interest, little to no interest at all, right? But nobody's surprised because this is basically what he's done his whole career. So him kicking back at Turki Al-Sheikh is mostly because he doesn't want this magnifying scope to be shined on him or shown on him. But it's not. If you don't want to fight, then you won't make the fights. And then boxing will move without you. That's all. You're irrelevant. You're a big name fighter that obviously they want to have as a part of this movement, like they do all big fighters. But at the same time, if you're not interested, you're not interested. They're not going to be chasing you. So let's just look at a few misconceptions or a few things that we should be fundamentally excited about with this new influence from Saudi Arabia. So first of all, it's keeping fighters busy. We've seen that huge. Fighters that generally fight once a year are already fought twice this year in 2024, with further fights already scheduled, right? This is great news. Fighters are getting paid. It's not just star fighters. It's literally fighters from lower weight classes, the biggest weight class, and it's guys with big names to guys that fundamentally are very obscure. Like some of the guys that have been fighting are UK obscure, right? Even in the UK, they're not big names, right? So it just shows you that everybody has an opportunity to get paid and utilize this resurgence to boxing globally to help benefit themselves. Next, he's working with all promoters. So a lot of the problems you and I've had with boxing and the fact that promoters seem to be getting in the way of making fights consistently to push their own agenda, their own narratives, this is being squashed. You can still do your own stuff, but yet you're probably going to benefit more from working with them, working with him specifically. Spending or spreading money around other countries and fan bases. As I just mentioned, money in big events going to the UK, money in big events going to the US, as well as the Middle East. So, what could be wrong about that? Nothing. Like literally, it's hard to understand why anybody would be hating. We saw Oscar De La Hoya hating because the event that's going on in California, he feels it's stepping on his toes. But yet at the same time, he could be a part of it. He could be benefiting from it, but he'd rather, like Tank Davis, be an obstacle, right? An obstacle to change. Giving new fighters a big platform, obviously. If you're on these events, it's a huge global platform. These fight cards have all been on DAZN, which means that globally you are able to watch these. And I know some American dumbass motherfucking fans somehow think if you're on Showtime or I don't know where else, ESPN, that somehow this means you're global. No, it doesn't. Because neither of those two platforms is showcased outside the US. And I know this because I live outside the US. Showcasing the biggest names as well. This is great. We've gotten big fights. We got Fury versus Usyk, a fight that we did not think was going to happen for undisputed heavyweight championship. We obviously have Beterbiev and Bivol, a fight we didn't think was going to happen. Unfortunately, it still may not happen. But, fundamentally, the paperwork was in. Right? And other big fights of this magnitude, which is just great for the sport of boxing. These guys are giving Bud Crawford a platform to showcase himself. We know that the PBC spent, probably 10 years basically trying to blackball and downplay Bud Crawford from 140 all the way now currently to 154 pounds. And it still looks like they're still trying to fucking get in the way. But luckily, because of this money from Saudi Arabia, they're not so fortunate. Think about a month ago when people literally were laughing because they thought the PBC was literally going to blackball Bud Crawford out of the 154-pound division. But thanks to Saudi Arabia and this big event, obviously now Bud Crawford could potentially walk away a unified champion after his next fight, making it very difficult for the PBC to not make unification fights with him down the road without basically showing that they just have been and continue to sort of blackball Bud Crawford, regardless of what people like Knockout Boxing has to say, and promoting the sport overall. And this is really the great thing. I mean, globally, this is getting a lot of attention, right? If in the States you don't feel that way, that's because you're American. And unfortunately, if it's not American, you think it doesn't exist, right? Like everything revolves around the US. I mean, if you still have this mentality in 2024, I don't know what to tell you. The world's a small place now, right? And the great thing is, because of this, boxing is really at an all-time high within my lifetime, right? With all this money, these events consistently happening. And a lot of that thanks to the PBC last year, who had huge events as well. And now, obviously, it's just generated into what we're getting now in 2024. And hopefully this carries on to 2025, 26, 27, 28, and further. And as I said, I'm hoping that the Saudi Arabians, Turkey al-Sheikh, can somehow clean up this sanctioning body bullshit and potentially get rid of all of them, buy them out, fucking get rid of them, and organize one global not promotional, but sanctioning body, one belt, one champion, one weight class. That's it. And then you have your top 10 contenders, just like the old days. Contending fighters fighting each other become significant. When you have two top 10 fighters fighting, we know the significance of it. We know the winner of this moves one step closer to getting a world title fight that now is significant because literally there's one champion. We don't need to unify. When you're a mandatory, you're a fucking mandatory. And that shit means something because people have seen your growth, seen you climb up that fucking ladder to put yourself into this position. And now they're excited about you getting your opportunity. Unlike today, where you have mandatories who haven't fought anyone, nobody knows who they are, and these fights won't sell, so it's hard to actually get them made, which means you're getting in the way of bigger fights being made, pushing smaller fights that shouldn't fucking happen. The king of the division shouldn't have to fight a guy ranked number 20th, not unless he chooses to stay busy, right? He shouldn't be mandated because this guy is one of 4 mandatories by 4 different sanctioning bodies, right? Like, I mean, let's just give a quick thing. Oh, well, I'm already on my computer. Let me just close this for a second. There we go. Boxing rankings. Okay, so there we go. Let me go back. Present, share my screen. There we go. So there we are. You can see it right there for yourself. We'll just use the heavyweight division as an example. So currently, here's your champions. Even though Fury is no longer champion, Usyk is. And then you have your mandatories. Anthony Joshua being mandated by the WBC and by the WBO, he's a legitimate contender. We know he is. He was a unified champion. He's come back with significant victories and obviously earned an opportunity to regain his titles, right? Then you got Martin Bakole. Martin Bakole is a good fighter that outside of the UK, most people don't even know who he is. He already has a loss to an opponent that most people aren't familiar with. He is definitely not a better fighter than Anthony Joshua. Linier Piero, the Cuban, and Mike Perez, the Cuban, this is the WBA, the worst fucking sanctioning bodies in the world, right? Somehow these 2 Cubans, one of whom is 40-something years old, inactive, hasn't fought a top fighter forever. The other one is a prospect. Michael Hunter, who's already beaten Martin Bakole, is ranked number 8. Ajit Kabial, coming off of 2 sensational victories, one, of course, against Frank Sanchez, obviously should be ranked higher now, thanks to beating Frank Sanchez, right? That's what you do. You beat another top contender to elevate yourself into position. Can you tell me off the top of your head right now, who has Martin Bakole beat to elevate himself into this position? And why does Manuel Charr have a fucking title in the heavyweight division at this time? We don't need fucking baby belts. We got 4 world title fights. So we don't need any other interim champions, regular champions, fucking franchise champions. We don't need any of that shit. And then you look at Filip Hrgović, he's earned his opportunity. But does this mean right now they should strip Usyk, who literally just unified and has a rematch clause? Because that's what happens in boxing when you have huge events. If you want guys to get into big events, you need to guarantee that they have another big event to follow, so they will take the risk. Hrgović doesn't deserve an opportunity at this point to stop the Undisputed Championship rematch from happening in what was a great fight. right? Then you look at some of these other rankings. Jared Anderson, still basically a prospect, hasn't really had a great step-up fight. Fabio Wardley, does he deserve to be here coming off of a draw? Justice Huoney is a good up-and-coming fighter, but you need Justice Huoney and Wardley and Jared Anderson to fight one another. And then you could put them in these rankings above top 5, maybe. But see, that's why we need to clarify and correct this. We need one ranking and one top 10 list. And the only way you can move up that list is if you beat 2, 3, 4 guys on the list to elevate yourself into that mandatory position. And at this point, when you got a world title fight, that shit would mean everything. And you and me as boxing fans, we would literally be excited about it because we would have seen the growth. We would have seen the steps that these people have taken to earn their opportunity. As I said right now, we know what Joshua has done to earn his fight. We know Hrgovic has been around waiting for a long time. But as far as earning, I mean, arguably he lost to Zhilei Zhang, right? Arguably. And then Bakole, literally nobody right now could tell me why Emmanuel Char's name is on this list as a regular champion and why Martin Bakole is there. Because Martin Bakole is probably going to go after Char in a fight that no one cares about for a title that should not exist. But let's get back to it. I don't want to go on my rant forever. So let's get back to this. So there we go. So the first fight being discussed, and obviously this is the big fight. This is the headline fight. Terence Crawford, 40-0, 3-weight world champion, 2-weight undisputed, moving up to his 4th weight division to try to equal what obviously Canelo and Inoue have done by becoming 4-weight world champions by fighting Israil Madrimov. If you watch boxing, you should know Israil Madrimov. Israil Madrimov's a good fighter, obviously a guy that hasn't got a lot of attention in the US, but nonetheless is still a very good 154-pound fighter and a dangerous test for Terence Crawford. Crawford beats him. He becomes a unified 154-pounder, moving from that weight class to fight Canelo for his 3rd undisputed division at 168 pounds is quite the jump. And understandably, people could be put out of shape out of this because it's not necessarily the fight that needs to happen, right? Crawford could go on to become undisputed at 154, depending on what the PBC does. None of those fights are going to be huge mega fights like a Canelo fight, so the money is not going to be around. And potentially that means to do this, he's going to have to fight 3 fights over the next 2 years to put himself in that undisputed position in a 3rd weight division. So at this point of his life, does he want to go through all that, or does he just want a one-off fight against a guy like Canelo for career high payday and the opportunity to have one fight to accomplish his goal, right? Only Crawford can answer that. And I think it's obvious because I think Crawford's been pushing for it. So that tells you everything you need to know. For Canelo Alvarez, 61, 2-2, 39 KOs, undisputed 168-pound champion. Obviously, at this point of his career, similarly to Crawford, he's looking for the biggest fights, right? He doesn't want just any fights, right? You throw him in with that Cuban mandatory that he has by the IBF. Nobody wants to see that fight. Literally nobody. Even Canelo haters don't want to see him fight that guy. Literally, if he fights him, they're going to shit on Canelo. But it's the IBF pushing that, right? We'd much rather see him fight David Benavidez, the weight bully, who's now at 175. A fight with him and Crawford, I think that's a great fight because I think Crawford can win. Crawford, like Floyd Mayweather, has the length and the skill set and the feet to beat Canelo Alvarez, right? But at the same time, for Bud Crawford, it's quite a big jump up in weight. He'd be fighting a guy obviously physically bigger than him. This is not the Canelo that Floyd fought. So he would definitely be stepping outside of his comfort range, which is part of being great, right? When Roy Jones jumped from 175 to heavyweight to try to become a heavyweight world champion, he didn't need to do that. He did it because he was striving for greatness. And he knew by doing that, something nobody from light heavyweight outside of Michael Spinks, but Michael Spinks didn't start his career middleweight. nobody has done before. We've seen middleweights do it. Stanley Ketchel moved up and tried to fight Jack Johnson, and I think there's a few other examples of people doing the same thing, right? But, none of them won, I don't think. Did they? Oh, maybe what's his face? The guy that beat Dempsey. Maybe he started at middleweight before going to light heavyweight and then going to heavyweight, beating Dempsey twice, Gene Tunney. So maybe Gene Tunney did it. So there you go. There's some historical knowledge. Tell me if I'm correct. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I could be wrong. But as far as a headline event for the US, two of the best pound for pound fighters in boxing, obviously two of the biggest names in boxing. This is America versus Mexico. You cannot be more America versus Mexico than Terence Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez. It's a great matchup marketing-wise. As far as the fight itself, I'm not sure. I think this fight could play out very similar to Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvin Hagler, right? Crawford could control the range with his feet and his jab, and then flurry to win rounds, to steal rounds, to go on to win the fight that way. It'll be interesting. As I say, it's not a fight that I'm pushing for, but at the same time, I understand why it's significant in an event of this nature. Then we get to this fight. Obviously, Jaime Munguia is suspended based on his last fight against Canelo Alvarez, against Caleb Plant, another previous victim of Canelo Alvarez. So two Canelo Alvarez victims, but a great America versus Mexico matchup. Jaime Munguia, 43-1, 34 knockouts. He fought Canelo Alvarez, did not get knocked out, right? Did he do better than Caleb Plant? I think overall he did better than Caleb Plant. Caleb Plant probably won some rounds a little clearer early on based on his movement and his jab. Plant, 22-2, 13 KOs, 1 knockout loss to Canelo. Obviously also lost to David Benavidez by decision in a fight that probably should have been a knockout loss. This is a great matchup. Stylistically, it's two very different people. We did see Munguia try to box a lot more versus Canelo, but against Caleb Plant, he probably won't fight like that. He's probably going to be back to the old Jaime Munguia, who's pressuring and forcing Caleb Plant to move and use his jab to try to control range. So it could be a really entertaining fight. And again, a really good fight, depending on how it plays out. Obviously, this is Mexico versus America. This is a great fight. And the winner of this obviously puts themselves back into bigger and better fights at 168 pounds, right? Maybe fighting, I don't know who after that. We will find out. Will they get a rematch with Canelo? I don't know if that's something that people would be interested in, but we will find out. Then we get this fight. And this fight might be one of the most interesting fights so far on this card, right? You get Shakur Stevenson. And I heard Knockout Boxing saying, Tank Davis fighting Isaac Cruz was a bullshit fight, not a great fight. But now Shakur fighting him is good. See, this is a good way to misrepresent the situation. When Tank Davis fought Isaac Cruz, he was a fighter who had already had a loss and a draw. Nobody had ever seen him. He was a Mexican fighter without much of a resume. He was a replacement opponent for Tank Davis, who was supposed to fight Rolly Romero, another opponent that nobody really cared about, but because he had a big mouth, people were excited to see Tank Davis knock him out. This fight's completely different. Isaac Cruz went on to give Tank Davis the toughest fight of his career, went on to destroy Rolly Romero to become a WBA world champion at 140 pounds. For Shakur Stevenson, if he goes up and fights Isaac Cruz to become a 4-weight world champion, that's significant. That is legacy. That's a man becoming a 4-weight world champion by the time he's 26 years old. For Shakur, 21-0, 10 KOs. It'll also be interesting to see how this fight matches up. We know he's had problems with longer hard punchers. He's tended to be very defensive and a little boring. With Isaac Cruz, he's shorter, a shorter fighter than Shakur Stevenson. But yet he's far more relentless than those fighters that Shakur struggled with previously. He doesn't have the range, right? But he's got the aggressiveness, the tenacity. And obviously he's tough because he took Tank Davis's punches and went 12 rounds. So it'll be interesting to see how Shakur Stevenson would deal with a nonstop pressure fighter like Isaac Cruz, right? And to beat him to become a 4-weight world champion, that is legacy. And stylistically, it's a really intriguing fight, right? Obviously, Shakur can control the range with his jab and his feet. He is the longer fighter, right? But Cruz is going to be nonstop. The guy's gas tank is incredible. He's going to continue to push and push and push. And Shakur hasn't shown to have that kind of Tank Davis-esque kind of power, even that Rolly Romero type of power. Yet that didn't stop or dissuade Isaac Cruz from moving forward. So how would Shakur Stevenson stop this relentless little Mexican meatball from being all over him for 12 rounds? Great fight, intriguing. And America versus Mexico. Then we get to this fight. It's interesting, right? We had two fighters that were victims to Canelo Alvarez. Now we have two fighters that are victims to the monster Inoue, who maybe potentially might be on that Anthony Joshua London card in the UK, which would be fantastic. People say he's got to fight out of Japan. Fighting in the UK, that's out of Japan. Obviously, this is a very different stylistic matchup. We have Stephen Fulton, 21-1, 8 KOs, and Luis Nery, 35-2, 27 KOs. Obviously, both of them ended up getting knocked the fuck out by Inoue. Fulton is a longer fighter, a boxer, a mover. Nery is a power puncher, a little fundamentally limited, but yet he makes up for it with his power and his relentlessness. He's not quite like Lopez. He doesn't have the gas tank he has. He also doesn't seem to have the chin, but neither does Fulton. So this matchup becomes very interesting. The winner of this definitely puts themselves back into a significant fight. For Fulton, potentially a vacant WBA 126-pound world title, because Raymond Ford probably is going to be moving up after this 5-on-5 card that he's going to be a part of, meaning that his title is going to probably be vacated, and Fulton is the #1 mandatory. For Luis Nery, maybe moving to 126 is better for him at this point. There's a lot of really intriguing fights for him at that weight class. Figueroa, Vargas, Lopez, Robsy Ramirez, Espinoza, Stephen Fulton, right? So there's a lot of fights to be made for a guy like Luis Nery to keep busy, and he's dangerous. Some of those fights he might win, some of those fights he might lose, but nonetheless, it'd be very intriguing. And obviously, the winner of this potentially could become a WBA world champion, depending on what goes on with Raymond Ford. But all I can say is Raymond Ford did say that he was moving to 130 pounds. Obviously, the reason he's fighting Nick Ball at 126 for his title is because of the financial money that he's getting from Saudi Arabia to be part of that 5-on-5 card. But depending on how he feels in that fight and how the result goes, he very well could move out of the division right after that fight. And then, of course, we get to the last fight on this card. We get Brandon Figueroa, 25-1-1. His one loss to Stephen Fulton, a bit controversial. 19 KOs. Obviously, he stopped Luis Nery as well. And then you have Luis Alberto Lopez, 30-2 with 17 KOs. He seems to punch a lot harder than his 17 KOs would make you think. Whereas Figueroa, I think, punches not as hard as his 19 KOs would make you think. This would be a very intriguing fight. Obviously, Figueroa is super long and gangly. Lopez, on his part, is the opposite. Short, stout, right? Aggressive. Both of them are super aggressive. So you could see that this fight could turn in to be fight of the year. Out of every fight so far on this card, this fight probably has the highest possibility of being 2024 fight of the year, right? Just because of the style that both of these people bring to the ring. This is a great card. We don't know if these are the confirmed fights, but you can understand the thinking behind it. U.S. versus Mexico. I'm glad that it's not just all Black Americans versus Mexicans, because that would just fuel the racial fire even more on a lot of these channels. So it's nice that obviously they got, Mexican American fighters as well as Black American fighters and then white American fighters to sort of, represent America. So let's move to the last slide. So who do you think will win the American edition of 5-on-5? Will the US prove their domination over Mexico, or will Mexico upset the Americans, right? Off the top of my head, I don't think there's any clear-cut fight on this card that you could say is definitive that one guy is going to win. I would probably lean towards Stephen Fulton beating Luis Neri. Figueroa and Lopez, I think that's truthfully a 50-50 fight. Figueroa hasn't had that much experience at 130 pounds, 26 pounds. Crawford versus Canelo, it's a hard one to pick, right? As I made a video earlier on this year predicting that I was favoring Crawford to win that fight. So, but obviously Canelo is much bigger. And so, we don't know how Crawford will deal with that. We saw how Charlo dealt with it, and it was very poor, very poor, very poor. I don't expect Bud Crawford to be like that, but you never know, right? Because unless you're in the ring dealing with the pressure and the power and just the skill set of the fighter in front of you, it's hard to really know what the other fighter is dealing with, right? We can look at him and think that he did piss poor, didn't show any heart, but it might be a lot more complicated than that. And that's all I'm saying. As far as Plant versus Munguia, once again, right? A fight that I think either guy could win. Either guy. Shakur versus Lopez, once again, literally a fight either guy could win, right? We know that skill-wise, Shakur should win. But we also know that aggressive fighters like Lopez are really the pressure that breaks the pipes on skilled fighters like Shakur. And this is the ultimate example of that. So you're not really sure how it's going to unfold. You could easily see Lopez just outworking and beating Shakur. And Shakur just trying to survive, ended up losing a decision just because he was outworked, kind of like Lara versus Canelo Alvarez, right? And Canelo Alvarez was never at Lopez's level as far as volume, nonstop aggression, and just fucking resilience. I mean, Canelo always had a limited gas tank. Lopez's gas tank seems bottomless, kind of like Munguia. So overall, I think this is a great concept. We have to wait to find out what the final fights potentially are and to see if Canelo and Bud Crawford can be done. If not, maybe you can leave a comment in the comment section below on what would be a great alternative fight that would be the headline for such an event, right? Because you need a big headline fight. Obviously Canelo, but then what American would you have him fight? Benavidez? Okay, Benavidez is American, so you could do that fight. But for some reason, Turki Al-Sheikh doesn't seem that interested in making that fight for whatever reason. So we have to see how it works out, what falls into place. But overall, I like the concept. It's exciting. It's exciting whenever you have these kind of great things going on in boxing that can get people talking and speculating and just, getting excited about the sport. So I'm excited. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. What other potential American versus Mexican fight could potentially be on this card? Leave it in the comment section below. If I get enough feedback, I'll make a follow-up video discussing those potential matchups as well. So let me know in the comment section below how you feel. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you next time. Remember to like, subscribe, and share.